as far as a start date and an end date. It also has to address the amount of commission that's in there. It has to address how that commission can be earned. And then, of course, it has to have a statement in there that says commissions are negotiable and they are not set by law. Those 4 items are mandatory for any buyer brokerage agreement or buyer's touring agreement, and those are not addressed in the Zillow touring agreement. Yeah. So I would say that you cannot use the Zillow touring agreement unless they amend it somehow.
Yeah, I understand. Zillow wasn't a party of that suit. They weren't under a NAR settlement that was agreed to. So as realtors moving forward, we're going to have to abide by those terms and conditions. So that's really critical. What Amir just told you all, the components that need to be in that agreement. That's the legal threshold that has to be met
the very minimum
for us to not be in violation and committing any of this antitrust stuff.
Right. And so, the other question that we get a lot is, so how can a buyer's agent be paid? A buyer's agent can be paid essentially in 4 different ways. It can be paid the traditional way by, a seller offering compensation to a buyer broker. No problem with that at all, except it cannot be communicated in the MLS. The listing agent can communicate it via email, social media, phone call, text message, email. But even though they communicated it to you, you still want to have that in writing, signed by, the broker and the seller and whatnot. The second way is that a listing agent can share a portion of their commission that they've earned with the buyer broker. Third way is that the seller can give a concession to the buyer, so the buyer can pay their buyer broker, per the buyer brokerage agreement that they're going to have. And then the fourth way is, the buyer can pay the buyer broker not directly, it'll be on the settlement statement, but pay them, cash wise, right on the settlement.
I want to digress real quick to something you said there. We got to make sure there's not going to be any fancy workarounds that you're going to be able to communicate as a listing agent what you could convey or where to find it via the MLS. You're not going to be able to go into realtor remarks or additional remarks or anything and say, go check out my Google business page or anything like that. You're going to be able to do it, but you're going to have to answer the calls. You're going to, as a listing agent, you're going to have to be able to, have something on your phone, maybe a message, maybe an auto responder, text message responded or something. This is just going to kick it back a little old school where you're going to have to get on the phone. And as Amir has told you guys, slow it down a little bit before you run to properties and go show. But I want to be very clear. The MLS is not going to play any games. They are serious about enforcing this because this NAR settlement has made them the police of this. And they're not happy about that, and they don't know how to do that. So there's going to be, the first time you violate that, it'll be a $500 fine. The second time you violate that, it'll be a $2,500 fine. The third time, you're probably at the very least going to be suspended, quite possibly lose your privileges altogether and have them revoked, because the MLS does not want to be in violation of the the settlement, the antitrust stuff, because those could be big fines coming down.
Yeah, so definitely. So as Mike was stating, it's very important how you're going to communicate as a listing agent to buyer brokers out there, how they're going to get paid or what they're going to get paid. And obviously we're still going to continue to get those calls where does a seller have to offer compensation? Sellers are hearing in the news that I don't have to pay a buyer broker. And yeah, that's true. They don't have to. But I think that's where us as agents, we need to really have the conversation with our clients,
absolutely,
buyers, sellers, and let them know really what the truth is. In my opinion, the best way to sell your home is to, the best way for me to sell your home in the least amount of time for the most amount of money is if you dangle that carrot in front of a buyer broker, because we aren't going to have, there's a lot of buyers out there who don't have the funds to pay a buyer's agent. And so if you wanted to test the waters on that, I mean, you can go in the MLS and look at current listings, ones that are offering nothing, and seeing how long that they're staying on the market. Whereas other homes in that market or in that neighborhood are offering a buyer brokerage commission, and they're getting showings, they're getting sales. So sometimes you're really gonna need to slow things down, dig in with your seller if you know, they're giving you some pushback on offering commission. But you know, at the end of the day, you need to make a business decision and find out whether this listing is gonna work for both of you. The sale is gonna work for the both of you. So.
Yeah, and another thing too, when you're doing your listing presentations and talking to sellers, and you really need to do your homework on MLS properties, non-MLS properties, and MLS properties that are offering commission versus not. That data is all out there. But if you're running comps for a listing, and the 3 comps you pulled up are offering a X% co-broke, and now you have a seller that doesn't want to offer any kind of buyer's agent commission, you need to back that out of the value of the house. They got $500 for their house, but they also paid 3% to a buyer's agent. It just made that house price really $485, right? So remember that, guys, when you're out there. I know we're getting out in the deep end a little bit, but if you're going to compare apples to apples, do that, and it's your job to explain that to your seller. Now, I will tell you, we don't want to shift gears off of the forums, but real quick, the market is changing.
Yeah,
market's shifting right now as you speak. You look at inventory, we have 6 months, we have an equilibrium on townhomes and condos, and single families going way up. I'm seeing brokerages offer at 3 to 4 to 5% to buyers agents all the time right now. So understand, when the market, if it was 2021, maybe a seller didn't need to offer a commission to a co-broke. You just put a sign in your yard and you get 8 contracts by the end of the day. When this market turns, I don't think you'll have that hard of a time explaining to a seller who, hey, you know, if you want to save, and remember your different sellers. You have sellers that, hey, I have to sell. I got to go. I'm leaving. Then you got sellers that go, kind of like to sell, you know, to get my price, I would sell. And then you've had the third level of sellers, which I would suggest staying away from right now, that, you know, think it's 14, 18 months ago, and that they can get any price in the world for that. Those are what we're seeing problems with. And while we got you on the phone, we'll go ahead and talk about the listing cancellation fee that we had to change. In your listing, you guys can, you know, obviously charge a fee. We had to change that here in the office. You can charge a fee up to $500 for a certain level property. Anything over $1 million, you can charge $1,000. But read the sentence before your cancellation fee in the listing agreement. It says the agent can be reimbursed for all their direct marketing expenses. So you can get your $500 cancellation fee and your direct expenses. So we want to be clear about that, because what we're not in is the business of charging fees to cancel listings. That creates bad will for you, Charles Rutenberg, all of us. We want you to be reimburse yourself. Didn't mean to get off the rails here a little bit, but we're getting a lot of calls about this. So.
Because, you know, as you mentioned, we are in that changing market, and, you know, I can't tell you how many calls I receive a day about, you know, listing cancellations, listing modifications, and things along those lines. And so it's definitely important, you know, because we don't want you to miss out on on what you spend on marketing.
No,
you know,
that's we cover your pictures. And
so definitely, you know, keep the receipts, document everything, because you want to provide that to your seller and say, these are, you know, you have to document what you're spending.
And we've had another question. The brokerage will not take any portion of your recovered marketing fees. Yes, we have to take 10% of the cancellation fee up to a $250. But if you have $1,100 or, you know, whatever the number is in expenses, we're not taking any of that. That's a direct. It's just going to be a pass through. The brokerage has to collect it. We'll have a place for you to tell us where that is. But again, nobody wants a canceled listing. That's just not good for you. It doesn't any good for your track record. I will tell you, my experience has been it takes the consumer, the seller, about 18 months to come to terms with them when a market has changed. I did this in 2009, 2010. It got to a point where they just were in complete denial. They would see the evening news. They would see every house on the street had a for sale sign in it. But mine's still worth what I paid for it or more because I've had it for 2 or 3 years. It's not the case, guys. So your job as a good listing agent, part of it is to get your sellers real to what's going on. And real estate's hyper local. Don't be reading the national market. Don't even be looking at Florida market. You need to look at not only Pinellas County or Hillsborough County, look at your zip code, what's going on, hyper local.
It definitely is. All right, so let's go dive in, just kind of an overview on the four forms that came out. I know, as I mentioned, these are on Rutenberg files. It's under compensation. So the compensation agreement, seller to buyer's broker, it's a two-page form. It's pretty much self-explanatory, except for, when this form is going to be used for the seller to sign stating what they're going to be offering to a buyer's broker. And there's paragraph 3 there has the term. If it's left blank, it defaults to 30 days.
Right.
And these agreements, they don't extend past the expiration of that listing. But if the listing gets extended or anything along those lines, then this agreement would continue on. And then, of course, if you are under contract and the 30 days has passed, of course, it goes through closing.
The contract.
The contract, it goes through closing. And then, of course, the seller has the option to pay a flat fee or a percentage of the price, or you can put in other terms. And then on the next page, it talks about dispute resolution, that the parties would agree to go to mediation, and just like our typical contract, it'd go to mediation, and if mediation doesn't work, then they essentially agree to go to arbitration after that. And just like we talked before, every one of these forms is going to have a disclosure that says the broker's commission is negotiable, and it's not set by law.
The second sentence to that you're going to see on every one of these forms too, pay very close attention to when you get your buyer's agent agreements out there, and you start saying, in no event will buyer's broker's compensation exceed the amount of compensation in the written agreement. So it's really critical, if you work for X percent, that your initial agreement says X percent. You can always take less. You're not going to be able to take more. What the DOJ and what this settlement and some of it was when buyer's agents were getting compensated from the seller and by the buyer, and nobody really knew until maybe on the HUD statement or whatever, that they were making money from both sides, and it wasn't clear and disclosed. So you can always negotiate it down afterwards. If you work for X percent and the deal gets thin and gets tight at the end, and you can just come back to your buyer and go, okay, we'll negotiate it down. That's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay to go the other way though.
Right. But as Mike was mentioning yesterday, when you have your buyer brokerage agreement, and let's say, you're on the buy side, you and the buyer sign a buyer brokerage agreement for, let's just say 2.5%. If you go and you find a seller that is willing or offering 3%, you can modify the buyer brokerage agreement. But if you don't modify it, then even if the seller is still offering that 3%, you can only accept 2.5%.
Yeah.
So make sure you're staying on top of these forms and doing modifications as you need.
And slowing down, like Amir has said, if you're going to go show somebody 3 properties, know exactly what and how you can get paid out of those properties, whether you need to modify your agreement prior to going to those properties with your buyer. I would think this modification of this agreement is also going to cover people that are getting internet leads or colder leads. And you have to have that hard conversation with somebody that really wants to just go see a house today. They clicked on a property on Zillow and they want to go see this property. You can always put a certain amount of fee in there, maybe a flat rate fee of $500 or $200 or $1,000, whatever. We're not going to pick your number for you in your business model. And then, okay, it doesn't work out, as we both know, as we all know. Usually the house they call on, they don't wind up buying because the agent knows more what they can afford and where they want to be, really, usually, and it doesn't work out. You can always, again, modify that arrangement back up. You could say, hey, I know that we met. I showed you XYZ property, and we were going to, you would have paid me this for that. But now I'm working with you on a regular basis. I am searching properties for you. I'm touring properties with you. then you can take that modification to your buyer's agreement and get back into a good place where you need to be. So this might be a segue for people working with colder leads. Instead of trying to get somebody to pay you thousands of dollars who they don't even know, maybe you can ease into it with that type of mentality.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then so moving on, well, let's stay with this one for a second. The seller to buyer's broker. So how would this work? In my opinion, as I just got this form, a couple days ago, and trying to understand different scenarios of how this is going to work. In my opinion, on how this would work is you sign a listing agreement with a seller. Seller agrees that they are going to offer compensation to a buyer's broker. So then you have this form filled out at the same time. And then when you have a buyer agent call you and say, what's the compensation? You can tell them, and then you can send them this pre-signed form.
Yeah.
So they have it when they come and show your property.
Perfect. Want to make clear too, that anywhere it says authorized associate, at Rutenberg, we let you sign as an authorized associate. You don't have to get a broker signature on that, just so everybody's clear.
And then, so moving on to the next form, the compensation agreement, seller's broker to buyer's broker.
Yeah.
Runs very similar to the one we just went over, has the parties at the top, the address. The buyer's name is optional to put in there.
Yeah.
Which I'll talk about in a second. And then, of course, section 4, you have the term. The default is 30 days, but you can obviously make it longer. If you're when you do go under contract, obviously it's going to run through the closing of that contract. Then, section 5 talks about the buyer broker compensation and how it's earned through the transaction, and what you can put in there, a flat fee or the percentage. Then, of course, on the next page is the arbitration, and then, of course, the disclosure about that its commissions are negotiable. Now, the interesting thing, so you take a listing agreement and you get the listing agreement signed. Seller doesn't want to offer anything, but let's say you get 6%. So you want to offer, your brokerage wants to offer 3% to a buyer brokerage agreement, or to a buyer broker. So you can go ahead and put that in there. The brokerage is offering 3% of the commission that we're getting from the seller to a buyer brokerage agreement. So that's where you put it in there. Having the buyer's name optional in there, I think it's important that as a listing agent, before you would give this out, you would have the buyer's agent provide you with the name to put it in there. Otherwise, it becomes a blanket form that you are now offering 3% to any buyer that this broker brings you. So I would say it's definitely important to use a buyer's, put the buyer's name in there. So that covers the two main forms that came out. After that, you have the modification to compensation agreement for the seller's broker to buyer's broker, and then the modification to compensation agreement, seller's broker or seller to buyer's broker. And these are essentially just modifications to those two forms. You never know what's going to happen during the transaction. Deals need to be made. And if there's going to be a change to the compensation offered, these are the forms that you're going to use to make those changes.
Yeah, and Amir talking about putting the name in there. Listen, you don't want to be in a procuring cause hearing.
Yeah,
is where it's going. Just because you just don't, because you're going in front of a panel, and the panel is no different than going in front of a judge or a jury, and you don't know how they're going to rule. So we always tell people, if you get in a procuring cause hearing, or you think things are going to be a little funny at closing, don't spend the commission.
Yeah,
because it's on the table, and you might be really surprised in how they turn out sometimes. We think we have a good gauge on which way that panel are going to go, and we don't always have that.
Yeah,
so.
Definitely. So I think, at this point in time, unless you have something else you want to talk about, Mike, let's go ahead and take some questions.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and open it up for questions, guys.
See how we can help everybody moving forward.
So just unmute there, Debbie, and it's all right. We're
sorry, a little technical difficulty.
That's all right. There we go. I think okay. Go ahead and ask to go ahead and unmute Debbie Schmidt. All right. No? All right, Debbie's got her hand up. We're trying to go to her question.
I think they should.
All right, guys, stay with us 1 second. Ask to unmute. All right. Well, wait.
Okay, maybe
Okay.
go ahead and type it in the chat for right now.
Yeah, go ahead and type in the chat. If you don't want to speak, you can do that as well, whatever. But you guys will have to unmute if you have a question. Anybody else got any questions they want to go over? All right.
All right, Amy said, in the event you charge 2.5% as a buyer broker and the seller ends up only paying 1.5%, if you decide this is acceptable, can you take the 1.5%?
You can always negotiate down. So let's say you're working with a buyer and you have an executed buyer's agreement at 2.5%. But the buyer has told you that, listen, I am really thin on this deal and I don't have any money to pay you at closing. I have enough for my down payment and closing costs, and that's it. The quick answer, Amy, is yes. You obviously can take less. You're never going to be able to take more, is what we want to drive home. So don't go out of there on your initial appointment and sign it at 1.5%, and then the seller winds up offering 2.5%. You cannot take that. Slow it down, find out what you can. Now, the other thing that I would do with any of these forms, if I'm working with a buyer, and that buyer straight up tells me, I do not have any extra money. As an agent, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to do everything I can to negotiate my commission out of the seller. Okay. And in the event that my buyer falls in love with 123 Main Street, and I don't know for a fact that 123 Main Street is going to offer any commission, go ahead and write the contract, guys. I know we've always told you we're not parties of the contract, but now you're making this a term of the contract. You can write it in there. It's very simple. One line: seller agrees to pay buyer's agent 2%, 2.5%, 3%. They can strike it all together. They can counter it, or you might get it paid. And I will tell you something. All it takes is the property, which they are doing now, sitting on the market another, month or two, and making the mortgage payment, making the insurance payment, the property taxes, another month or two. Well, the typical 2-month mortgage payment plus taxes and insurance would be a nice commission for an agent. So that's where you got to, produce your value and let everybody know. And listen, the other side of this thing, just kick ideas around. I think it's very clear to see that as a listing agent, it's going to be not uncommon for you, if you wind up in a multiple offer situation or a single offer situation, you're going to see that you're going to have to do that homework and tell your seller a little bit about the agents, what they're asking. Right. If I have an agent that, has been in the business for, a number of years, has a track record of closing deals, they have a little resume they sent me with the offer. Here's who I am. Here's what I do. Here's my success. Here's the people I've closed in the last 6 months, 12 months. That's going to be a good resume for me to convince the seller that, hey, we should compensate this agent. Yeah. So that's the good side of it. The other side of it is, and I don't mean to be harsh on the newbies or people that aren't as productive, but if you're brand newly licensed and I pull up, Amir comes into an offer and Amir, what is this? Well, that agent is, got licensed 4 months ago. Mm-hmm. They don't have any recorded transactions in the MLS. So I don't know that they've ever closed a transaction. I think that agent's not going to be worth what the first agent's worth. Right. And it's your job to present the offer. It's just another term or condition of the sale. And I know if I'm working with a successful sales team that has chosen a track record of closing transactions, I don't, that offer's got a check mark up in the high box right there. Absolutely. Okay. So understand, when we craft these things and put them together, you're going to have a lot more flexibility to craft an original type of offer. Yeah. Debbie's unmuted.
Okay. So then next question from Renata: are we having a live class on the forms? We are going to have a training on July 18th at Pro. That's just the contract.
Unless the contract's not out yet.
Yeah,
which could be.
So the plan is right now, July 18th, that we'll have a live class. Rebecca, it means that the buyer agent cannot get more than 2.5%, right? So I assume what Rebecca's saying is that if you put 2.5% in your buyer brokerage agreement, and the seller's offering 3, yes, you cannot take more than 2.5. So you would want to amend your buyer brokerage agreement to 3%, or just accept the 2.5 that you already agreed to.
So Debbie, your question, I'll read it for everybody. Once the compensation fields, I'm adding that for you, is removed from the MLS, other than calling the agents for active, pending, and sold, how do you suggest we truly compare comps in a CMA? Will compensation be listed in the MLS after it's closed? I don't know, and I don't know that MLS knows. We have been talking to Stellar. Stellar is, really overwhelmed. I don't want to, take a shot at anybody, but they have a lot they're trying to figure out. So we don't know if the compensation, if it is, it will only be recognized as a seller concession field. We know the biggest MLSs in the country have already declared that that's what they're doing. Stellar has not come out and said that yet.
Right.
Stellar, so there's going to be a concession field. With the concession field in the MLS, well, we believe there'll be one in Stellar as well. It might be a seller concession for a new roof. It might be a seller concession for a mortgage rate buy down. It might be a seller concession to pay a buyer's agent. So the concession is not going to be contingent upon servants closing that. So it's going to be harder, Debbie. That's a good question, and it will be more difficult. Currently, it's not, but after the August 17th or August 6th implementation date, we'll just have to see what that looks like. There is some things that we would love to have definitive answers on. We just don't have complete definitive answers at this time.
Okay, can you hear me? I don't know if you can or
I
not.
can hear you.
We can hear you.
Basically, what I was wondering is, in order to do a proper, or what I would consider a proper CMA, it goes back to what you were speaking to earlier, in that you kind of want to let your sellers know what their competition is offering.
Absolutely.
If they're offering. So my question goes back to, now we can go into the MLS when we do a CMA and say, okay, this one's offering 2.5, this one's offering 3. And even though we know that that is somewhat negotiable, or that it could be negotiable, what we're going to have to do, as I'm understanding, is actually reach out to the agents that have the active listings, the pending listings, and the solds that might be on a CMA for them, and find out if they are offering anything.
Yeah.
In order to price it correctly.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Because like as Mike stated, we don't know if the MLS will add that field as a field for, statistical purposes after it closes.
Right.
But to get the active or the pending, what they're currently offering, yes, you're gonna have to call the listing agent, or maybe they have another avenue. Maybe they're emailing it out, social media, maybe they have a website where they're have all their listings on it and what they're offering as far as compensation. So
yeah, and I suspect, my best guess, and again, it's a guess, is that you're just going to see that concession field on closed transactions after the 6th to do your comps on.
Mhm.
And it's not going to delineate exactly what that's for.
No.
Again, if you call the agent and you get an honest agent, I know being a listing agent and many years in the business, I had appraisers call me all the time, needing to know information like this. This is not going to be that much different than that.
Right.
And I will tell you guys, moving forward, your relationship in the real estate community with your peers is never going to be more powerful than it's going to be moving forward. You're going to have a good reputation. You're going to have to be known as somebody that works with the other side. Because I'm going to tell you something, it's going to be really easy for them to pick and choose. All they got to do is say, hey, had a bad experience with this agent. Let's not pay them 2.5%. Okay. So they might take your offer and strike your commission right out of it. And that could have to do with the listing agent informing the seller. So should that happen? No. Will it? We all know it possibly will.
Yeah.
Your experiences. So guys, it's going to get back to really, really cooperating with your peers in the industry.
Right.
So at what point in time will Charles Rutenberg, like in the Rutenberg files, when will you have us upload the buyer broker agreement?
Well, you can start now.
Yeah.
But we are gonna make a mandatory field in there, as soon as our IT department
Yeah.
gets it done.
We've,
We've asked for it, so hopefully it'll be done within the next week, week and a half.
But it won't be prior to a transaction coming to fruition. Like we.
oh,
just-
yeah, we're gonna give you at least 30 days prior to the drop dead date that the changes have to be made. Absolutely. We're waiting on it any day. There will also be, and we're talking about it right now, whether we're making it optional or not. You're gonna want one of these commission agreements on the buyer side of the file too, whether you're getting it from the seller or you're getting it from the other brokerage. If that were me and I was the agent, even if it wasn't optional, you can bet I would have it in there, because I want this transaction to duly noted that I'm getting paid from somebody, and we have an agreement that states that.
Yeah.
All right, you good, Debbie?
I am, thank you.
All right, we have another question from, I believe, Hank Ford. I think he invented the Model T. What do you have, Hank?
No, that would be Henry.
Oh, I get confused all the time. My bad.
Hey, guys, quick question. As far as the negotiating of commissions goes, if you have a short due diligence period where, you know, we're seeing 5 days, sometimes typically 10, is there a point where if you don't have your commissions negotiated prior to that due diligence period expiring, does that affect anything? How, you know, if the you know, the seller is saying, yeah, we agree to pay a commission, but you don't have it in writing by the time the due diligence period expires, is that, how does that affect the buyer?
Well, that's a good question. I don't, you're gonna have to have some agreement in place when you show them the property. We're gonna back up to one of the very first conditions of the NAR settlement is MLS is going to be the enforcement branch, arm, if you will, to make sure that an agent does not show a buyer an MLS property without an executed buyer agreement. That's going to have to be in place. Now, so we're talking about having an agreement in place. You can always modify that agreement at a later time and change it up or down, the percentage that you agree to work for. I'm trying to wrap my head around why, and these are all great questions, and we're going to figure all this stuff out as we go. I don't see how the due diligence period, the inspection period, will really come into play there. Am I missing something, Hank?
I mean, I
Well,
think,
Go ahead, Amir.
what I was gonna say is, yeah, Mike's right, you know, you obviously you're gonna have the buyer brokerage agreement, so you know what you're being paid. Cause you have your agreement with the buyer broker. Now, I assume you're talking, okay, well, we're trying to get this paid by the seller.
Correct.
So, now I would assume when you went to show the property, you called the listing agent, said, hey, are you offering anything? Listing agent said, no. And then, you wrote into the contract at the direction of the buyer, seller will pay buyer brokers 3% or whatever it ends up being. And you either got that agreed to or you didn't. Let's say they didn't, they scratched it out, but the buyer said, okay, well, I'm gonna, and you made your buyer aware of that. Hey, seller's not gonna pay it, so now it falls back to you to pay it. Are you good to move forward with this contract? If they said yes, okay, you know you're getting paid from the buyer. If they said no, I'm not good with that. Well, then I guess they're not going forward with the contract. And so then you go back to the seller and say, sorry, your counter offer buyer doesn't like it because they don't have the funds to pay my commission. So in order to get this moving forward, we're gonna need this, we're gonna need you to chip in on my commission. And then it just becomes that negotiation. But if everything's signed and there's nothing from the seller stating that they're going to pay your buyer brokerage commission, then, and your buyer's already told you, I don't have the money. Well, you're working for free. Yes, you do have a right to collect from the buyer, but how's the buyer going to pay you?
Yeah,
Does that answer your question, Hank?
Yeah, it's sticky.
Yeah, very sticky.
yeah. It's also going to make the agents now much more a part of the negotiation moving forward. You may have an agreed upon amount at contract time. Then guess what happens? We have inspection periods and oh my goodness, we need a new roof. And okay, the seller's got 10 grand towards the $18,000 roof. The buyer's got, you know, a few grand they can come up with. And then the other two parties would have to, you're not a party in the contract, but the other two people participating financially in the contract would have to negotiate that. I mean, we've done this all along, but now it's going to really tie you into the transaction more. Because you can't just say, no, I'm supposed to get 2.5%. It says so right here in the MLS. So these are all moving rosters. All right, Larissa, what do you got? Got to unmute yourself, Larissa.
Yeah, sorry, that was taking me a second.
There you go. How you doing, Larissa?
I'm doing well, thank you. In a scenario like, if you say you encounter a buyer that just says they want to see a house and the seller's not offering compensation, and the buyer agrees to pay you, say 2%, 2.5%, whatever you work out with the buyer, right? And like because we know like people can be shady. So what if a buyer just agrees to that and says, yes, I can pay you 2.5%. But then when it comes down to it, they say, no, I don't have that. Like, what happens then? The contract's already signed. And
okay. I think what you're saying is, how are you going to enforce getting paid?
Yeah.
So that's a great question with a lot of thought that we don't have a definitive answer on. I suspect we may have to be looking at civil court at that point. Never a good option, by the way. It's the worst option. And you can read our policy and procedures manual on how we participate with you guys on anything like that. We'll see where it goes. I suspect there's going to be a cottage industry, if you will, pop up in the legal arena to enforce buyer's agreements. Because do I think that your scenario has a good possibility of happening? I don't want to say rampant, but yeah, I could see this happening. I can at some point in time. Now, if we negotiate this the other way, the whole contract is going to be contingent upon making sure the agents get paid. This is the one way that we could actually have a closing and do not get paid at closing from that agent. There may be all kinds of creative stuff working out. I don't want to speculate too much because we just don't know yet. But who knows? You might have to take a payment plan out from them or something. But, this is where slowing down, like Amir has said from day one when this happened, you're going to have to slow down. You're going to have to really get to know these buyers. They're going to have a level of trust in you, and you're going to have a level of trust in them. More like listing agreements now. Very rarely does somebody just pick a random stranger off the street to list with because they have a real estate license. They at least interview them and get to know them. Not like how buyers have been being represented for a long time, as we all know. Buyers, they just clicked on a property on Zillow. The first agent that ran and opened that door would get whatever was offered in the MLS. So it'd be different.
We got another question from Renata. I always use buyer brokerage agreements with X% commission from buyer if seller isn't paying, but verbally I can tell them I negotiate with the seller if they're paying less than my agreement with the buyers. I think I'm good using this correct. So I think what you're saying is you're going to just throw numbers out there. You always use a buyer's broker agreement and you always put 3% in there. And the seller tells you they're only offering 2.5%. You're saying that you're not going to go after the buyer for the difference of that 0.5%. Are you okay to tell them that? Yeah, you can tell them that.
Yeah.
Is that what you're trying to say, Renata?
Yeah, she's on. Yeah. You're good, Renata, on that. The biggest thing is, the buyer understanding the gravity of, hey, I could come after you after this 3%, so I'm going to do, I think it's critical to have a conversation with them, understand what their financial position is, guys. No more is it, is it just tag them and bag them and go. You're going to have to understand, hey, I'm working with somebody here. This is where it's really good to, get their pre-quals in and their pre-approvals in. So you I'm not saying that you ever look at the financial situation, but you kind of got to ask those hard questions.
Yeah.
Like if you're buying a $500,000 house and you just agreed to pay me $15,000, can you prove to me you got any of that?
Yep. And there's roundabout ways to go through that, but really, just like if you received a contract from a buyer and you're on the listing side, you're gonna reach out to that lender.
Yeah.
And you're gonna ask some, invasive questions and they're gonna answer as much as they can. You need to start doing that with your buyers. And when you sit down to have that buyer representation talk or that to talk about the, buyer brokerage agreement and whatnot, get them to talk to the lender. Then you reach out to their lender, have those talks. Have they verified their income? Have
Absolutely.
they verified, that they can pay my commission? Are they liquid? Things along those lines. So, as I keep saying, slow everything down. Don't just jump in the car to go show property. You really need to get to know your buyers.
You're not going to be doing yourself any services to do that. Hey, Renato, a follow up to your question. Can I get X% from seller, the rest from buyer if the seller's commission is too low? You can absolutely get, let's say you agreed to the work for 3% for the buyer and the seller is offering 1%. Now your buyer owes you 2% at closing, or any combination of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's kind of where we're going with this.
And have that conversation. Obviously, you need to have that conversation with the buyer before they go under contract. Say, hey, I don't know if you remember, but you signed a buyer brokerage agreement where you agreed to pay me 3%. This seller's only offering 1%, so there's a difference there of 2%. It's your responsibility. So, are you good to move forward with this contract? They say yes. Well, they sign the contract, keep moving forward, and then you let the title company know that your fee is the 3%.
Yeah. And we will have title in here soon enough talking to you about how things are going to look a little different at closings and the documentation they're going to need to make sure that that they're getting the buyer's agents are getting the compensated and title's getting the necessary documentation.
And another question was, will the class on the 18th be by Zoom? It's going to be live and via Zoom.
Yes, so you can now we have a seating for 100 at the board. It's been filled up for some time. Keep an eye on that on the class calendar. The people viewing on Zoom will not be able to be as interactive. Michael runs a very interactive class, does a great job. So I would be there. We're not 100% sure that we're even going to have the new contract at that point, but we will have enough new forms and everything to be a very comprehensive class, guys. And again, as Amir told you earlier on, that as is contract is a 20-year work of art that covered so many scenarios. I'm going to tell you,
It used to be 8 pages, right?
Yes. 98% of the calls that we get in here on brokerage transactions, the answer's right in the contract. You just got to know where to look for it.
Exactly.
All right, Keith Connors, what do you got?
Is there an advantage to asking seller for total commission and sharing versus separate seller and buyer agreements?
Well, so I think I know what you're asking. I would absolutely go list a property for X%, which would have been my previous percentage. All right, I'm just going to say this. Is there anybody in this class that's not a Rutenberg agent? There should not be. We could use numbers and talk commissions as long as I know all of you guys are Rutenberg agents here. So if not, please leave. There's your disclaimer for the feds. So if I was always used to working for 6%, which it was actually more like 7%, but and then I would offer some. But if I was used to asking, I would still, Keith, tell the seller, this is what we work for. We're going to list your property for this. This is what I'm going to offer a co-broke to another brokerage. So now I think that yes, it would be wiser. The selling agent, the listing agent that always tries their best to have something in there is going to be doing their seller a service. The industry is going to really want to work with you. But to answer your question, you're still going to have this document right here. We will keep these probably pre-signed. We'll see up in the dashboard. But you're going to have a seller to buyer's broker. You're still going to have that with your property. If you list 123 Main Street and you know you're going to be offering 3%, every other brokerage is going to have a copy of this that may show it. So if you've got Joe from Keller Williams coming to show the property, he's going to need one of these for his file. It's the only way he can ensure he gets paid. That makes sense. If you're not clear, Keith, raise your hand or ask another question or supplemental there. We good? All right.
Think so.
Debbie, your hand is still up. Did it just not go down from earlier, or do you have another question?
I did, but you kind of answered it. It was going toward, the same thing, like, could we still do 5% and just know that we're making the decision on what to split, even though we're getting their permission to do it?
Yeah, I don't think we don't have the new listing agreement out. I don't think the new listing agreement's gonna mention anything about what you charge to the seller and what you, Charles Rutenberg, agrees to pay another brokerage. I don't think it's gonna be in there. I think that question's gonna be removed altogether. The seller will be compensating Rutenberg and Debbie, say 5%. Debbie's business practice on that is to offer 2% or 2.5%. I don't believe the seller is even going to come into play as to if you want to offer 4% or 1% or no percent. I don't think that's even going to be in the listing agreement.
Yep.
Okay, so it'll probably still be 5 or 6%. It's just a matter of if they're agreeing to split it, and if not, then we have the opportunity to reduce ours.
Essentially, that's what I understand.
That's what we understand. But again, I don't believe the seller is even, whatever you can negotiate as a commission from a seller, it's going to be your discretion what you offer or offer. You may not. The seller might come in and give you a low percentage and go, that's all I got. And you decide to take it, and you might not have any money to offer. Now, the buyer would have to come back in and buyer's agent would have to come back in and try to negotiate that in a contract.
Exactly. Okay, that clears it up. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. I don't see any more questions, guys. We did say 10 to 12. That was a typo. These are 10 to 11. We will take questions as long as we need to with you guys. But we're going to be doing these every Wednesday, 10 o'clock. We'll have different people in here how it's going to affect us in different ways. I believe the next one is Bernardo or Michael. Michael Cochran from CMG will be talking. We've heard some good stuff about that. How you're starting to be able to finance the commission for is it VAs?
Well, the VA, so the buyer will be able to pay their buyer brokerage.
Through the loan.
They've come up with a way, or they put a ban on it, essentially, at VA. So, for those of you who don't know or haven't done a VA loan, it's been a longstanding rule that one of the VA buyers' benefits is that they cannot pay certain fees. One of those fees is a brokerage fee. So when the NAR settlement came out, that kind of eliminated them from being on a level playing field with all other buyers. Well, through the National Association of Realtors lobbying the VA to make this change, we were able to get that changed. And now VA buyers can play on the same field as everybody else and pay their broker if that's what they choose to do.
And a really good point that we'll phase out with. I truly believe that NAR will. The one thing NAR does really well is lobby at the highest levels. It won't happen overnight, but I believe you will see up to a certain percentage financed in all loans. I don't know how long. I would probably say, Congress doesn't work quick, but I would say within 2 or 3 years. So the wild, wild west will be the next 18 months. It's not going to be the wild, wild west. You're just going to have to negotiate on your behalf all the time. But I would put your resume together with working with buyers. I really would. I would also consider this. A traditional business model is usually the 30-30-30 rule. 30% in labor, 30% in material, and 30% of profit to the company with a 10% margin for those things to run over or under. I believe as an agent, you're going to have to start investing in your business. It's no longer, hey, I ran out with that buyer and, yeah, I had my time and I had some gas, but, I got a $10,000 commission and you didn't have any 30% for labor and you didn't have that other 30%. I think you're going to have to start investing in some tools to separate yourself. There's some great tools out there with the floor plan type of stuff. Even as a buyer's agent, you can invest in this software that I'm hearing that's the number 2 ask for thing is a floor plan. They want pictures and a floor plan, these animated things. There's some software out there. And we will be doing an AI dive. Byron's sitting in here in the room with us. He doesn't know he's going to be a critical part of that because he's our AI guy. That tells you what's going on around here. So I think that you really want to look at what might differentiate yourself as to why somebody would work with this buyer's agent over somebody else. I think some of these tools are going to be helpful for you to do that. So, all right, guys, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap this thing up. Thank you for jumping on today.
Thank you.
We will figure this thing out as we move forward.
Yep.
All right,
Give us a
guys.
call if you need anything.
Yeah, give us a call. All right, shut us down.